at least a child should graduate school saying, wow, look at all of these amazing things I've made. Like, I can rap, I can write, I can make videos, I've made a movie, like I've done all of these things, and like, damn, I feel great. You know, that's just so much more useful, right? Whereas like a kid turns up and says, hey, 92% in the boards, like, what do I do with that?
So I'll just begin by introducing Ryan, who's our guest for today. Ryan is an educator and the founder of Jigyasa, the school. He was actually a finance graduate from the University of Cambridge and then later turned to education. He is very active and well known in education communities on platforms like Medium and LinkedIn, and is a firm believer in instilling a sense of curiosity in all his students.
Thanks, Sia. It's lovely to be here. Always great to talk to people who are looking to do things in education. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Yeah, so the intention of this podcast is that we want to spread awareness around education and the problems that are faced by its stakeholders, such as students, parents, teachers, policymakers, etc. And eventually, we hope that this podcast can serve as a learning resource for all of these stakeholders as we move forward. So, without much ado,
Cool.
I'll just move into the first question. So, your formal credentials, as I mentioned, lie in the finance and business space. So, I have to begin by asking what prompted you to get involved with the education space in the first place?
Yeah, I think it was not something that I planned. It's definitely something that happened quite. Um, I don't even want to say organically. It was quite sudden, to be honest. So I was working at a trading fund in London, and my mom used to be in Dubai. I used to be in London, and then we decided to move back, or rather, she decided to move back, and then I wasn't very happy in my job, and I'd been in the UK for about 8 years. So I was like, you know what? Like, I'm hearing a lot about India, and things seem to be happening there. Maybe I should give that a try and see what we can do there. So I knew that she's a teacher. I knew that she probably would want to do something in education. So we discussed starting a school. And for me, it was just like, hey, like, that sounds cool. So I'll help you start it, and then I'll see what I want to do. Right? I might take a job in trading or in investments or whatever. Right? There's lots to do. But then, like, after we started it, I realized I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the teaching aspects a lot, and I really enjoyed just getting views of parents from different backgrounds. And one of the great things about being in education is you get people from so many different backgrounds, right? They've had so many different experiences in life, but they all come to you as the person running the school because they see eye to eye with you on a few things with regards to what they want for their children. So yeah, and like, from something where I thought, okay, I'll get it up and running and then see what I wanted to do. It's been about 8 years now. So like, clearly I enjoy what I do. And there's a lot of, one of the things that is, is something that a lot of people probably don't know is that working in education is a very creative field. People don't necessarily relate creativity to education, but for me, like, as a teacher, like, I teach math primarily, like, it's all about creativity, right? It's about creativity in how you get kids to understand concepts. It's about creativity in how you introduce concepts to them. It's creativity in terms of what kind of activities are you going to introduce. How can you make things fun for them? So it's actually a lot of fun. It involves a lot of thinking, and it involves a human connection, which was totally missing in my previous job in finance. Like, I had a spreadsheet in front of me. I had this thing called the Bloomberg terminal, and that was it, right? That was my job. Like, I could have headphones on with music playing all day, and I could do my job like 10, 11 hours a day without speaking to another individual, right? And obviously, like that, it's okay. It works for some people, but uh, it wasn't something that I enjoyed a lot. So education is great that way. There's so much human interaction, which is always fun.
So, was it difficult to make the transition from being in such a isolated sort of corporate culture into the more creatively lenient career option that education gave you?
Um, I don't. I wouldn't say it was difficult. Um, it was actually quite a welcome change because I was craving, um, I was craving something where I got to deal with people, where I got to understand other people's views, where I could speak to people and really get into their minds, right? Like, how do they see the world? Why are they thinking in a certain way? Can I change that and point them in a direction which I think might be better? So um, it wasn't it wasn't difficult from that point of view. It was pretty seamless. What was tricky, what initially was obviously like when you start a new school or like any new business for that matter, it takes quite a while before like you get established, you start making a little bit of money. It can take long, right? Many people don't even get to that stage. So that was definitely something which was scary initially. I mean, I'd never been in a situation like we basically didn't earn for like the first 2.5 years right after we started the school. So it's kind of like, it's again coming back to, so there's philosopher Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the guy who's written Black Swan and stuff like that. So I really like one of his quotes, right? He says like the three most addictive things in life are carbohydrates, a monthly paycheck, and heroin, right? And when we started the school was when I realized how addictive that monthly paycheck can be. Like, you just like, whatever, sure, you work hard at your job, but there's that money coming in. You don't need to worry. Like, it's all good in the hood. And when that stopped, when we started the school, I was like, wow, like it makes you think, it makes you work harder. Like my level of drive and initiative climbed, like, I don't know, probably like 5x after that happened, because like, you have to find ways to make things work. You have to find ways to live your life differently. You can't just, I used to be like, yeah, let's go clubbing, let's go eat out, let's do this, let's do that. All that had to stop, or I had to minimize it so that, you know the expenses and the revenues sort of tallied up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much behind. At the end of the day, education in a lot of spaces is still treated as a business, and it comes with so many of these other like hidden issues that we as a consumer, like I as a student, never really put much thought into.
Yeah.
Uh, but today we'd like to talk about some of the more like systemic and issues more prevalent to education space as a whole, such
Mhm.
as where do you think are a few places where the current education system fails?
uh where do I start? um I think, I mean, there's like, we could spend the entire podcast talking about where it fails. So I don't want to bore people, but I think fundamentally, like, you know, most educators, parents, students, I'm sure, spend a lot of time thinking about, well, there must be like one cause or reason from which all of the other problems flow, right? Um, there's to be something that leads to something that leads to something that leads to something that leads to something, right? And that's how we ended up where we are, right? And I feel, again, this is more India specific. It does manifest in other parts of the world for sure, but it's very intense in India, and that is this excessive focus on marks and on grades, right? Like everything comes down to like, oh, like how much did you get? Like, what's your score in the board exams? What's your, what rank did you get in your entrance exams? Like everything just comes down to that, right? And all said and done, school and college, they test such a tiny fraction of what is needed to succeed in the world today, right? And the worst part is that many of these, you know, so-called esteemed educators and the people who set policy and all of that, they don't even think along those lines. They had a system that was given to them, handed over to them when they got the job, and they're just pushing that to the next generation. And then new guys come and they push that to the next generation, and then new guys, and it just keeps carrying on. So it's like, what, like, no one's asked me for my board exam marks after I got them. Literally, I don't think anyone has asked me. Like maybe 5 of my friends, because we were like competing with each other. But after that, who cares? Nobody cares. I mean, after university, like who asked? Like I had to put in my grades when I was applying for my first job. After that, where have they featured? Nowhere, right? So like people your age intuitively or instinctively understand that, right? They probably know that it is not that important. But sort of as a society, I think we're struggling to move away from that mindset. We're still sort of just, for lack of a better way of trying to um, assess people, we just keep going back to the whole marks thing, right? And I think that's like a big issue. It like marks don't capture your abilities or your potential. So why make 80 or 90% of people going through school feel bad about themselves just because they're not getting like 95 and 97% and 99%, right? It doesn't make sense. Like why are you in education? Like you're in education to uh to build people up for their life, right? To give them the positive skills, attitudes, mindsets, whatever it is. And you're not going to do that if you're going to tell everyone who gets less than 90, oh, I don't know if you have a future, right? And even if someone doesn't say that explicitly, that's sort of what just gets pushed into people's minds when they're really young, because everything just keeps coming back to like, oh, he's doing very well in school. Okay, what's your metric? Oh, he got 95 in maths. So like we need to move away from that and, move towards skills which maybe can't be captured that easily by quantitative metrics.
I think one of the reasons maybe why we keep falling back into this like scenario where we keep looking at marks and grades and how we perform on a sheet of paper, because it's so much easier mentally, than to look at a child, to get to know them, to know where their skills lie, what type of mindset
Yeah.
they want. It's so much easier to say, oh, he's good at maths, or oh, they suck at English and therefore they're going to be a failure, or whatever. And it's so
Yeah.
much more
Yeah.
easier. And because we've been doing it that way for such a long time, like I don't think there have been any major advancements in the education space or in the education
Yeah.
curriculum for like
Yeah.
decades. So it's
Yeah.
so much easier.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So
to a point, it has become very, very redundant. So
yeah.
what are some of the redundant skills or attitudes beyond just the focus on marks that we are teaching our students, and how can we adapt the curriculum to create true 21st century thinkers?
I think a lot of so firstly, I think you mentioned what are the skills that we're teaching them that are redundant. There are very, very, very few schools where the focus is on skills. So we're actually not teaching them skills, right? So the question is like, it's not so much about what are the skills that are redundant. It's more about like, okay, what skills can we bring in, right? And like there's lots of skills, I guess, that you could develop, right? Like all of the common ones that you hear spoken about, teamwork and collaboration and empathy, creativity, resilience, like all of those skills slash attributes, right, are important. But I think what, according to me, is not only like the most important part now for any person, whether you're 16, 26, 46, 66, it doesn't matter what your age is, uh, and will continue to be that way, I think, pretty much for however long we live, is just that ability to create stuff, right? So by stuff, I say, like, it could be anything. It could be a blog article, it could be a device that you invent, it could be art, it could be music, it could be like anything, right? I think the fundamental focus in school has to be that emphasis on creating things, on creating products, on creating services. And students should leave school having done so much of that by the time they're like, whatever, 18, they're just pros at looking at something and saying, oh, you know what, I want to make that. If they can do that, and sort of built into that process is going to be a lot of, a lot of the skills that help you work with other people, right? Good communication, good written skills, good spoken skills, teamwork, being able to play according to a team's strengths, um, adding value where you see fit, understanding how other people think. All of that is going to be built into this process. But I think the chief skill that anyone needs to focus on now, whether you're a school student or like you've been out of school for 20 years, is that ability to create stuff. And it could be anything, but the more you practice it, the better you get it. Because fundamentally, you look at anyone successful today, right? Whether they're an employee at a company, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're an impact, social impact sort of entrepreneur, like whoever, it doesn't matter, right? What are they doing? Essentially, they're creating stuff which is then useful to people, right? That's what it comes down to. So if children are going to be sitting in school from the age of 4 to the age of 18 and just like studying because they have to pass these exams, like at age 18, they're going to look back and say, oh my God, what have I done the last 14 years? I've literally added no value to myself or to anyone else. Whereas if you take the approach, okay, you know what, like treat exams as a necessary evil of society, okay, what you said makes sense. It's just easy, right? Like, hey, what was your like average in the boards? Oh, it was 82. Oh, okay, cool. Like, it's just easy, right? Instead of like spending 1 hour getting to know a person, which is what people should do, right? And which is what creates that human connection. But assuming you don't want to do that, at least a child should graduate school saying, wow, look at all of these amazing things I've made. Like, I can rap, I can write, I can make videos, I've made a movie, like I've done all of these things, and like, damn, I feel great. You know, that's just so much more useful, right? Whereas like a kid turns up and says, hey, 92% in the boards, like, what do I do with that? I can't do anything with that, right? Like, whereas if you tell me, hey, look, I made this movie, you're like, dude, that's amazing, I loved it. Like, how did you get the idea? Like, conversation starts to flow, you get into their minds, see how they're looking at the world, what are they trying to change through that piece of their creativity. It's just more powerful that way, right?
Yeah, creation is a process that I was introduced to much later. So, say about 8th grade, and that's when I started getting into doing my own this whole process. And what I learned through the process of making things of my own is that it requires a certain level of vulnerability And it's a scary process. It's so much easier to just sit down and study and go give a test, ace it,
Yeah.
everybody,
Yeah.
social validation, personal
Yeah.
validation, everything, it checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And there's also this whole idea of you grappling with uncertainty, and if
Yeah.
will I be good enough, is this even worth all the time I'm spending on it?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
when we had
Exactly.
our last conversation, you spoke about this whole idea of uncertainty and how it needs to play into our current education system. So this is kind of a paradoxical question. So what I want to ask you is, how does one prepare for uncertainty?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's something that is something that I think of a lot, because sort of I just happen to have been lucky to have been placed in situations many times in my life where things were looking very uncertain. Like I just didn't know what was going to happen, right? And so the one thing that I've realized is like you can't go and do a course to prepare for answer. Like you can't, like no one's going to put up like a 10-week course online saying master uncertainty. No, like you can't do it, right? It's not teachable like that. It's not something where you can have a curriculum. The only way to do it is to expose yourself to newer situations as often as possible. And ideally there should be situations where you don't really know how it's going to pan out. It could go well, it could go bad, it could be something that becomes really big in terms of your impact on the world. It could be something where you intentionally want to keep it very small, but you're willing to experiment with it and see what happens. And I think how you prepare for uncertainty is to just make a philosophy of frequent experimentation a part of your life. And the earlier you do that, I mean, we try and inculcate that in the kids at school, right? They're like, I mean, all our kids are under the age of 10 pretty much, so they're very young. um, but they're okay with it. We frequently try and give them problems where there's no like cut answer. There's no like right answer. I Sometimes even I wouldn't know how to go about doing it. So it's just like, hey, like, that's an interesting problem, why don't you go try and figure it out? And whatever they know, I mean, especially after online school started, they've become very good at searching for stuff on the internet, and they can go read up blogs, they can watch videos, and that's helping them hone that skill of tackling uncertainty, right? It's very different to, let's say, you read something in a textbook, and then all of the questions on the textbook are related to that particular chapter, right? But life doesn't work like that, right? Like life doesn't say, well, all right, so for the next 12 months, like these are the challenges I'm going to give you. Like never happens, right? So as long as you're, sort of, as an educator, the way I look at it is like, you got to frequently be like you're manufacturing these situations where kids go down this path. They don't really know where the path's going to take them. Like most times, even I don't know where it's going to take them. But they're always like iterating and learning and just gaining that ability to, or that mindset where they think, you know what, okay, I've never faced this before, but I'll figure it out. So that's how you prepare for uncertainty. Like that's pretty much the only way. And the younger that you catch them and get them to do stuff like this, the easier it'll be for them. And like they won't even think when they're adults. They'll just be like, oh, okay, not seen this before, but I've done this before like hundreds of times, so I know how to go about doing it.
I think when we're younger, we're not born with bias, we're not born with prejudice or the I can't do this attitude that's sort of built over time based on what people around us say, based on the experiences we have. which is
Yeah.
why, yeah, when you're younger, it's so much easier because you don't have any other perspective. Once
Yeah.
uncertainty becomes the normal, then you're so much better
Yeah.
equipped for it later on.
Yeah.
Which,
Exactly.
yeah, which brings me to the next question. So, like you said, all the students in your school are 10 or below, and you run essentially an early learning center, which follows the principles of Montessori education. So, how does this approach differ from the conventional system? Would it be beneficial to adopt some of the larger principles of Montessori education into our curriculum as a whole?
Um, so so Montessori, I mean, Montessori is part of what we use. It's not the only thing that we rely on, but essentially broadly the philosophy that we use is that we try and give children as much opportunity to to chase their curiosity, basically, right? So a lot of it is to do with discovery. A lot of it is to do with self-initiated learning, right? So the child very often sets their own learning targets. It's not always driven by the teacher. And so uh, operating something like that is tricky, right? It's tricky because teachers need to be trained in a way where they're not always looking to lead what happens in the classroom. They're also willing to let go and let stuff happen in the classroom, right? And that's where the really beautiful sort of instances of learning happen, where it's like you've given the children a little bit to go on, and then they just take it away and do stuff on their own. And there's so much incidental learning, there's so much peer learning, right? I think most adults hugely underestimate how much kids can learn from themselves. Not can, but do learn from themselves. So, and teaching is one of the best forms of learning, right? So you learn so much about yourself and about your subject when you teach it, right? So that's how our classrooms are structured, right? So it's not all sort of one way directed from the teacher. Of course, it's been a little challenging to implement something like this online, right? But as far as possible, we've tried to do it. And coming to your question about like, um, can we implement this like broadly? So you can, I mean, you can pretty much do anything, but what I've seen ends up happening is, so it's really interesting, right? So the teachers who are teaching currently, like 2021, right? Even the youngest teachers are going to be like born in 2000. Okay. So the people who studied in the 80s and 90s, right, and the 2000s are still sort of like their mindset is still of that old traditional, like rote learning style of education, right? So you can't all of a sudden expect everyone to imbibe this new philosophy of letting children dictate how their learning proceeds, right? It's very difficult. I know this because I've been seeing it now for the past 8 years. I mean, it's extreme. I mean, we've had teachers um, come in like at interviews, and they don't get it. They don't understand it. Some of them even say stuff like, "But like, why do you need a teacher then?" Right? So you can implement it, sure, but key is getting all of the teachers on board with this philosophy. Like, the teacher has to fundamentally realize and accept that they're just going to be a guide, right? And they've got to be experts at figuring out where students are and then leading them on in a way that isn't too prescriptive. Basically, that's what it comes down to. You've got to like basically, like, the philosophy also, sort of the one of the underpinnings of the philosophy is that every child is very talented and is very intelligent and can teach themselves a lot, right? So you have to let that happen. So you can't keep dictating stuff. So point I'm trying to make is, in most schools, the philosophy is, and the outcomes that they're looking for, only works if the teacher dictates what happens in the classroom, right? So unless you find a way to change that philosophy, that mindset of teachers of letting learning happen as opposed to making it happen, it's very tough to implement something like this. And like, I've sort of been criticized a lot, by like other educators. Like, I've always held that Montessori is a great philosophy and a system, but it's by no means complete, right? It's I mean, it's like 80 years old, right? And we're in 2021 today, and there are certain things that it doesn't take care of, right? It doesn't fully fit the needs of 2021 and beyond. So you have to think of it like, people get wedded. So that's one thing about educators, they get wedded to their own philosophy, like whatever they were trained in. So Montessorians, they'd be like, yeah, Montessori is the best, yeah. Like the guys who are in Reggio Emilia, like, they'd be, yeah, Reggio's the best. Like the guys who are following Waldorf, they're like, yeah, Waldorf's the best, like. And I just feel like that's pointless, right? They all sort of start from like the same point, right? Which is, how can we equip children to become, self-initiated learners, so that they can live a good life, be content, so on and so forth, right? So sometimes, like, I see like a lot of educators, like, they just miss the point. They're just like, our methods are the best, and we will never look at anything else. Sorry, if you're that closed in your mindset and your thinking, you can imagine what you're going to, sort of, push down to your students, right? So so changing mindsets is really difficult. Um, like someone who's been teaching, let's say, 20 years, and they've been given that curriculum, and they've just taught that, like, let's say a grade 10 math teacher. And for 20 years, that person has just taught grade 10 math. Like, suddenly, to expect such a person to say, to move to a style of teaching where it's like, you know he or she gives their students a problem, and instead of, the usual thing is what, like, they'll go to the board, they'll write down the steps, this is how you solve it, people copy it down, some understand it, most don't understand it, and like, whatever, the teacher's job is done. But then to move from that style to a style where it's, where you're incrementally getting children to think much harder, think creatively about math, like, it doesn't just happen like that, right? It's not like, okay, today I'm wearing jeans, tomorrow I'll wear corduroys. Like, it's not like that. It doesn't happen like that. So yeah, in theory you can implement it, but in practice, changing people's minds like that, and it's not only the teachers whose minds need to change, it's the parents, right? Most parents don't understand, I shouldn't say don't understand, most parents don't, they've never viewed, um, education differently, like, and it's a generational thing, right? You just sort of go with whatever you did, unless there's a reason for you to think differently. So the people who are already thinking differently, like, there was something in there that has caused them to think differently. But for the large part, many parents have not had that moment of, or like, I should look at something else. So it's tough, it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the fact that first, it is the whole idea of giving up control over a situation, which is clearly very difficult to do. But also,
Yeah,
education as a space constantly demands change, and educators are sort of at the center of it. So while they
yeah,
are facilitators of the teaching, of the learning, they also have to do a lot of unlearning in order to move forward
yeah,
themselves. And I think that's
exactly.
where the issue stems from, or that's where we might have a problem making this a more global or inculcating philosophies that are a little bit more out there on a scale for the masses. But this
Yeah.
year in particular, 2019, 2020, 2021, there has been a lot of changing and a lot of unlearning and learning out of sheer necessity, because of course we've been in
Yeah.
the middle of a global pandemic and everything
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
sort of been thrown out of the window.
Yeah.
So my question is that as an educator, how has COVID-19 sort of challenged you and your team to think outside the box? What permanent changes? Because you're already viewing the world in different ways. Like Zoom has sort of become the norm at this point. The way we are recording the podcast is normal. So,
Yeah.
like, what permanent changes will the pandemic cause to the way we think about education?
Um, yeah, I think so. One thing that even the children, like the children at school who are really young, even they figure out, right, that they can learn anything online, right? It was funny today, like, so I'm doing this course, and I was like, so I've been teaching them card tricks, right? And I started doing the trick. I just started talking about the trick. You know, I literally, I think I only said like, okay, for this trick, I'm going to use 21 cards. And immediately 2, 3 kids went, oh, I know this, I know this, I know this, right? Because the source of their knowledge and my knowledge was the same video on YouTube, right? Like I'm not a card trick expert. They're not either. So where were we going? We were going to YouTube and we were trying to learn tricks of YouTube. So I think, you know, hopefully what this pandemic will teach people is that um, for the reasons that, you know, you and I went to school, which was like kind of a transfer of knowledge from, let's say, teacher to student, that is not the reason children will go to school going forward. Like they can sit at home, they don't even need a teacher on Zoom. The ones who are really you know, really sort of comfortable learning on their own, they'll just learn everything off YouTube. Like we have a number of kids like that, 7, 8, 9 year olds. They learn anything off YouTube, Khan Academy. You don't need school. So what do schools exist for, right? Schools will come into play for that creativity angle, right? For making stuff, for doing experiments, for working on things where you can't actually do it on your own at home, and for working on projects and activities where you need to work with other people. So what I'm hoping is that, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, like that focus of school as a place for, like, you know, getting through the curriculum will change. School will become this place where you come to work on really interesting activities, projects, hang out with your friends, you know, have fun. And that's what school will be for. It'll basically be like a learning club, right? And because all of the curriculum stuff, like, I mean, you can do it online. It's all easily done via apps and all of that. And frankly, like the children are not even that interested in that. You know, sure, they might be interested in a few things, but what they really, really love is like getting their hands dirty, doing activities, like creating things, creating whatever, right? Like papyrus rolls, motors, paintings, terrariums, like all of that stuff, right? And working with their friends, creating things. That's what I think, that's where we're headed, hopefully. Um, and I think, yeah, one thing that the pandemic has taught us is like some things are just clearly better off taught online. Like I'll give you a very simple example. So we used to do Scratch in school. Scratch is like a visual programming language. And there was always this sort of like problem because we didn't have enough laptops, right? So it was always like 2 kids to 1 laptop, and then we'd show them something on the smart board, and then they take turns to sort of do it on the laptop. Now all of that is gone. They all have their own laptop. So like the teachers just doing something, and like everyone's like, it's been amazing. Like we've covered more concepts in the last 8 months, 9 months than we did in the previous 2 years pre-pandemic. So for some things, like clearly the online version is much better. But for other things, like, I mean, everyone needs that human connection, right? That's what school is for. Like you love going to school, not because like, or not primarily because of the stuff you're learning. You love going to school because of your friends, because of your teachers, because of like the social element, right? So we need to get back to physical school for that, because it's not healthy for anyone's mental state to just be sitting at home. And you know so yeah, so I think the pandemic has shown some things are better off taught online, but it's also showing that I think the reasons that people might choose a school are going to be pretty different going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I missed out on my entire senior year online, and it wasn't the classes or anything like that I missed. It was the sitting with friends in free sessions or
Yeah,
going and eating lunch together that were the more like that were the parts that sort of felt awry in a sense.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, we'd definitely be looking at education in a different space. Just how different and where will it go? That's something that only time can
yeah,
tell. And
yeah,
that's,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that's all I had for today. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I'm so glad you agreed to feature on the podcast. If there's
Yeah,
any
I
like,
think it was.
yeah, if
Yeah,
there's
sorry,
any
go ahead.
closing words or anything like that you'd like to say, please.
Um, I mean, I'm just really happy that you guys thought of me, to bring me on. Like, I had a lot of fun as well. So thanks for that. Closing words. I mean, I think what you're doing, you explained it to me when we chatted initially, and what you guys are doing is really important. Um, and it's really cool to see, like when people talk about education, they mostly talk about, like, you hear views of principals and you hear views of senior teachers, you hear views of parents, but you hardly get to hear views of students, right? And they're like students are what everything exists for, right? They're basically the main or the most important stakeholder. So I think what you guys are doing is really important work. And yeah, I mean, I'm just happy to be involved in whatever way. So let me know how I can help.
And yeah, it was an honest pleasure to have you here. I'm sure this conversation will get a lot of people thinking of really why we go to school and what education could look like. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.